Hi everyone, this is Dr. Anthony Bacevice, past president of the Academy of Medicine of Cleveland in Northern Ohio, with one of our occasional interview programs where we present information that is of interest to our physician members as well as others in the community. Today, I have the privilege of speaking with Dr. Robert Hobbs. Dr. Hobbs is the outgoing president for the 2016-2017 year at the Academy of Medicine of Cleveland in Northern Ohio. He is completing a very busy year, during which time he became extremely involved in not just in areas that were of interest to the Academy per se, but he got involved in a lot of educational and legislative programs. Today, we're going to talk about some of the legislative activity that Dr. Hobbs has been involved with and that is of interest to Academy members. So Dr. Hobbs, I'm going to call you Bob. Thank you for coming to be here today.
Thank you.
What does the Academy do from an advocacy point of view? This is an important component of what we tell our members that we're involved with. So what's this all about?
Well, we are engaged actively in lobbying on behalf of medicine and our patients for legislative bills that impact the practice of medicine and affect the citizens of Ohio. Our legislative committee meets several times during the year. We review bills that are introduced in the legislature. We seek input from the physician leadership, from our membership, and other surveys, emails, grassroots efforts to determine how this particular legislation will affect those who practice medicine and those who are the recipients of medical care. So once we determine whether a bill is favorable or not favorable to medicine, we will begin our efforts to lobby in its behalf or try to change the way this bill is written.
Are your efforts predominantly at the state level, Dr. Hobbs?
Almost entirely with the Academy. There are a few efforts that we make nationally to the U.S. Congress, but my guess is 95% of our efforts are in Columbus.
Now, let's talk a little bit about how our other members can get involved, and then we're going to go into just a little bit more information about what transpires to get bills enacted. So when we're talking about our membership, the physicians that are members of the Academy of Medicine, how can they get involved and how can they become advocates for the other members and for how we practice in the state?
Well, there are a number of ways, but probably the best one is to get to know their state legislator, to create a permanent, lasting relationship with that legislator. On the Academy website, physicians can log in on the Advocacy tab, enter their zip code, and find out who represents them in the House of Representatives and in the Ohio Senate.
And you're saying then by knowing who the legislators are, then get involved through communication, emails, telephone calls, letters, the kinds of things that I remember when I was in grade school, the teachers would say in civics class, you need to learn to write letters to your congressman and to your legislators. So this is sort of taking that to the step that it really makes a difference in how we are successful in getting some legislations through and at least representing our side when legislators meet to decide what they're going to go forward with.
Yes.
Let's go on then and have you tell us a little bit of information about how do bills become laws. We know, it's not a matter of sort of, we know that down at the State House in Columbus, we have a Senate and a House of Representatives, not that different than we do at the federal level. What process takes place when someone thinks of a bill or when there's a need? What goes on at that point, Dr. Hobbs?
So it's a very complicated process, and if you go onto the Academy website, you can find a 15-page document from the Ohio Legislative Commission that we have made available to members showing the various steps of what happens when legislation is first introduced to the point where it is signed into law. The initial step of all of this is for a legislator to become aware that legislation is needed for a specific issue. And most of the time, that need is brought forth by the public rather than physicians.
So the public comes up with these initiatives that say a given problem exists and something needs to be done about it. I then get the impression that what you and some of the others on the legislative committee do is once these get drafted into the legal language, then you look at it and pay attention to the things that are going to have some impact on how we practice medicine.
That's correct. Most often it's unintended consequences because usually the legislation is very good intentional work, but sometimes they don't see all of the angles.
I think we all have examples of that in our minds that we can relate to, that where we can say that we've either been affected by a bill that became law and then suddenly realized that, oh my goodness, this has quite an impact that we didn't anticipate. And as we know from time to time, some of these things then have to be reevaluated and possibly changed as time goes on.
Yes.
Now, part of the work that you're doing is also on you said the legislative committee. Do you actually go down to Columbus and represent us in person on some of these bills of interest?
Yes, actually I've been there quite often, and that's one of the most effective ways to communicate with your legislator by making a personal appearance in his or her office. They are very impressed when someone visits them because they realize that this person is impassioned about a particular bill, that they would travel 2.5 hours to personally talk with a legislator about that bill.
And one just needs to knock on the door? Do you make an appointment?
Usually make an appointment.
Okay.
Yeah.
That may have sounded like a naive question, but I've never done that before. How can Academy members help with the legislative affairs and the legislative efforts, Dr. Hobbs?
Well, again, they can contact their legislators. They can do that in 3 different ways. We talked about personal meetings,
right,
and they can be done in Columbus at the State House. They can be done locally. Often the legislators have a local office in their district, and they can be done at Academy events. We recently had an Academy-sponsored event where we met with a legislator, and we had about 20 interested physicians in the room talking with him and expressing their concerns about a particular piece of legislation.
And it's your opinion and borne out in truth that the legislators take this dialogue in a serious fashion?
I believe they do. They seem to. So you can write to a legislator, you can send them a letter, you can send them an email. They have an email spot on their website, and it is important to know the bill that you're talking about, know what the bill is about, and express your concern clearly and succinctly. You can call them on the telephone. The telephone number is again on their website. You're likely to talk with an aide. You need to again convey the specific bill, whether you are requesting support or opposition from the legislator. You need to keep your comments brief and to the point, and you always need to be polite.
Very good. Dr. Hobbs, thank you very much for this information. This is something that all members of the Academy of Medicine need to be aware of. One of our major points of activity here at the Academy is to be advocates for physicians in how they practice medicine. And with people like Dr. Hobbs, no doubt as he is now becoming the past president, I suspect he will continue to remain active on the legislative committee and perhaps show his face in Columbus on more than one occasion in the future to champion the causes that are important to us. I'm Dr. Anthony Bacevice. Thanks for your attention on this episode of more interviews about Academy activities with our members. Thanks for watching.